Yes, I know, I'm the greatest guitar player in the world. If you ignore the 700 million people out there who are better than me. Before I begin, keep in mind that the script was written over the course of maybe 3 hours and it was just a borderline stream of consciousness process. It's basically just a video diary with Rec Room gameplay in the background with some semblance of a story. Also, this is part one of two because as I was like 40% through writing the script, I realized like if I were to say it out loud, it would be like 20 minutes. And you do not want to hear this voice for more than like 20 minutes. So yeah, you're welcome. Well, it's been a while since I uploaded my first video, and for the very few people who did tune in to see my last video, which was posted, I don't know, 5 or 6 months ago, I apologize. I know everyone was dying to see the next episode where I would kidnap Treathers, take him to my sensory deprivation chamber, and read him the collection of erotic Minecraft fanfiction I've written throughout the years. Look, I'm not here to waste your time trying to justify my hiatus. I'm too honorable for that bullshit. I'm going to waste your time trauma dumping instead. You know, one time, when I was 8, my dad forced me to play Toad while his drunk friends got to play as Mario and Luigi. And, you know, I never really recovered from that trauma. When I was 6, I caught my dad jerking off to pregnant ogre midget porn, and oh wait, that one's actually pretty traumatic. I'm not going to lie. Yeah, that fuck you up. Now, when most people talk about their relationship with Rec Room, they talk about how Rec Room has degraded into a greedy corporation that has forsaken its old dedicated player base and creators who held the game prosper for so long, instead focusing on exploiting vulnerable children for profit in various ways, which self-destructively backfired as it disgusted and alienated the fan base that again defined and supported Rec Room. So why won't I jump on this bandwagon of sorts? Well, for one, I don't care to do any research and make a video on it. Secondly, tons of aspiring Rec Room YouTubers have made videos about that, partially stemming from genuine passion and concern, and also from, let's be honest, wanting views to grow their YouTube channel temporarily. And I don't want to be another pig chasing a carrot on a stick. Oh yeah, feel free to check out my Mr. Beast hit piece next month. Plus, I want this video to be a slight subversion of a retrospective. While most retrospectives focus on the game itself or the developer's impact on the game's decline, I want to describe the impact Rec Room has had on my life personally. Essentially, I want this to be genuine, and I want to explore feelings I can guarantee some older Rec Room players have felt at some point while playing, but were too, reserved. That's a nice way of calling someone a bitch. Anyways, let's get on with the video. Of course, if I wish to deconstruct my relationship with Rec Room, I have to go back to the very beginning. I started playing Rec Room in February 2021 when I was 16. My dad stumbled upon a couple of VR headsets somewhere, Oculus Quest 2 specifically, from a place I can't remember, and he brought them home for us. My mother, predictably, wasn't invested at all. She thought her taste was too refined and sophisticated for such a childish, escapist piece of technological voyeurism. Or at least, I'm sure that's what she felt while reading smut. But my dad and I were hooked, particularly regarding paintball. Paintball was just so much fun. I loved the weapon variety, with each weapon being suitable for one or many purposes, which allowed for strategic play that rewarded resourcefulness, adaptation, and weapon versatility in players in addition to pure skill. I loved learning basic movement and map routing strategies that, depending on the weapon I was holding, strategic intent, or simply if I was in an aggressive or evasive mood that day, either increase or decrease the amount of times I ran into players in the opposing team, which made me every game feel like a product of my choices, which helped with me becoming more immersed in the gameplay. Hell, I loved the variety of maps, each rewarding different playstyles, which, from a competitive perspective, made every game feel truly different. The strategies these maps encouraged helped me feel immersed in the game's environment and, by extension, the game itself. Except Corey. Fuck Corey. Legit, I'd rather eat cereal without milk than play Corey. I'd rather commit to a homeless percent speedrun world record than play Corey. Hell, I'd rather shove a beer bottle in my ass than... Oh wait, I'm supposed to talk about things that I don't like doing. Yeah, I think my reputation in the climbing community won't be the same after this. However, paintball wasn't really what made me love Rec Room. It was the community that made Rec Room such a core part of my social life and personality. The sad thing is I'm not even joking about that. I was an extroverted kid, which made my dorky, obnoxiously ingratiating, and eccentric characteristics apparent to many people. As a result of hating myself, I simultaneously, naturally, and artificially became annoyingly friendly in an attempt to obtain validation from my peers, which was supposed to challenge my self-hatred. As you might expect, this contributed to frequent bullying directed towards me during my middle school years. Through those experiences, I became conditioned to repress my true self, and I became withdrawn as sort of a coping mechanism. This prevented me from being attacked, to not feel weak and inferior, not purely as a result of feeling weak after being beaten, but also as a product of their disparaging words, causing me to feel like a, well, again, weak, pathetic imitation of the person I imagined in my head, which left me feeling like a dysfunctional mess of a person. in a way. I'm not suggesting this is how all excessively introverted people are made. Numerous factors come into play, including it simply being ingrained in their honest nature. I'm trying to reason and reflect on the primary reason why I personally became introverted, timid, and taciturn. Yes, that's a word I found in my thesaurus just now. How does it hinder their ability to form friendships? I can't speak for other people, but for me, because I hated myself so much, I naturally assumed that others shared that view. I was projecting, essentially. When you are convinced everyone hates you and that you're unlovable, you start to think that going through the effort of forming relationships with people is fruitless, thus you don't bother. Furthermore, even in situations where people decided to approach me with the intention of becoming friends with me, I would act cold and uninterested. After all, I didn't think anyone wanted to be my friend because of my projected self-hatred, so why would I care? Which caused people to believe that I didn't want friends, so they respectfully walked away. Essentially, I was a loner with a tendency to repress my genuine identity, which was done to ultimately avoid the feelings of vulnerability that being bullied evokes, and to project my self-loathing onto other people, both of which prevented me from connecting with other people. What does this have to do with the Rec Room community? Well, all of my concerns about showing my more strange and peculiar characteristics were mostly nullified because a lot of the player base were, to some extent, like me. They were, to some extent, socially awkward, they were excessively introverted, and they were slightly odd, and they felt alienated and lonely to a certain degree, pursuing a sense of belonging connection they couldn't obtain or feel in real life. My commonalities with the player base in terms of personality and social goals were conducive to forming and fostering a sense of camaraderie and connection that I couldn't get from anyone else at the time, save for my family and a couple of close friends. Furthermore, because we were somewhat similar in regards to personality, I felt free to be myself. Strangely enough, I could only be honest and real in a virtual environment where everything is vague, and I basically hid behind a mask. I guess it gives more credence to the saying, give a man a mask and he'll tell you the truth. Plus the fact that people valued me, even if they were not wholly present, helped allow me to strengthen some of the self-esteem that was crippled by my depression, inability to conform socially, and the persistent bullying I endured for a while as a developing child. Even in the real world, when I was removed from virtual reality for a bit, I would think, these people in Rec Room like me, how bad can I really be? Whenever those distressing thoughts about how I'm less than human would resurface. Furthermore, I was highly insecure about my appearance and attractiveness at the time. I can guarantee we can all relate to that. Like, seriously, raise your hands if you've had this problem. I don't care if you're in a grocery store, a Holocaust museum, or a police officer is asking who killed this woman. Raise your hand right now. I was never explicitly bullied for my physical appearance. However, the fact that I was being bullied, the fact they never clearly stated why they were being so malicious towards me, and because I was a child with minimal self-awareness of my own personality-based oddities, I assumed it was at least partially because I was unattractive. What further compounded that insecurity was that I was, and still am, a person with self-loathing issues. As a person diagnosed with depression, I internalized every bad outcome as something being indicative of me being unquestionably and irreversibly broken, which of course worsens the problem. For every mean-spirited comment, threatening gesture, or hostile assault, I thought it was partially because I was ugly. In reality, bullying happens for numerous reasons. Sometimes they're immature, insecure, and troubled people who rely on bullying to reaffirm their fragile perception of themselves as masculine, capable people. Sometimes it's to feel a sense of control in their lives by having such an immense negative influence on someone else's life. Sometimes violence is a coping mechanism from much more terrifying emotions and trauma buried inside of them. I'm getting ahead of myself. Essentially, depression elevated the pain associated with being bullied by automatically placing the blame on myself, and it forced me to revisit all of my faults and vulnerabilities so the depression can justify its own cruelty. In my case, ugliness was one of those faults in my mind. Again, what does this have to do with Rec Room? Well, in virtual reality, your face is never shown. Instead, your avatar is presented to people. I think you can see where this is going. In Rec Room, no one is ugly. Okay, I changed my mind. In all seriousness, I could portray myself however I wanted to be perceived by others with a lower risk of judgment. In theory, there's a great deal of artistic expression involved in designing your avatar. You can thoughtfully select various in-game cosmetics and combine them to reflect elements of your personality. I was free to be the person I was as a child while retaining all of the self-improvements I developed as I grew older. I could sort of be this optimal combination of both selves, and that could be reflected in what I wore. Well, at least that's what I was thinking as I was sitting in my gaming chair looking like this. Except, imagine that, but there was this like white liquid splattered all over my face, which I'm pretty sure was at least 25% milk. Jokes aside, that will be helpful when I inevitably need a backup and insanity plea during my upcoming trial. The less said about that, the better. The point is, I could be living as my best possible self with my best friends, usually without judgment. However, outside the headset, I felt like a nobody with hardly anyone. Additionally, I have to highlight the Rec Room games. In my life, I was a fairly accomplished runner at the time. Yes, you could say I peaked in high school, and I can't really argue with that. However, by that point, I had entirely lost interest. However, I couldn't quit because I had dedicated 10 years of my life to that sport. And as a result of like specialization and self-hatred, I was convinced I couldn't pursue anything else. Thus, if I abandoned running, I would be a nobody, doing nothing else of my life besides school. As a result of my self-hatred, insecurities, and my misguided dedication to preventing my bullies' words from becoming a reality, I stayed in running until I finished high school. Sure, even though I did grow to no longer like competitive running, my competitive spirit did not die, it merely became redirected towards something else. After all, people who have internalized the notion that they are worthless either give up to cease an intense, arduous war they're convinced they won't win, or they'll exhibit competitive characteristics to prove to others that they are something which, if successful, gives them the validation that they can use to combat those demoralizing, self-belittling beliefs about oneself. In case you couldn't tell, I was in Camp 2. I mentioned earlier that in Rec Room, I was a huge paintball enthusiast when I began playing, but my insecure competitiveness manifested itself in other endeavors, most notably quest, climbing, stunt runner, and restraining order percent speedruns, which, as the name implies, is speedrunning a restraining order. Nah, I'm just kidding. Why do something in Rec Room when you could do it in real life? I mentioned earlier that in Rec Room, I was a huge paintball enthusiast when I began playing. Insecure competitiveness manifested itself in other endeavors, most notably quests, climbing, stunt runner, and restraining order percent speedruns, which, as the name implies, are speedruns of restraining orders. Nah, I'm just kidding. Why do something in the Rec Room when you could do it in real life? In Rec Room, I did feel like I was with the right people while living as the freest, most unadulterated, and best version of myself. Furthermore, I was satisfying my competitive spirit in a way that I cared more about, as sad as that is to admit. Furthermore, achieving a considerable level of skill in most RROs, I was temporarily combating the feelings of worthlessness that were naturally a part of me and were reinforced by some of the people in my life, at least in the past. Lastly, I mentioned the medium of virtual reality, which I glossed over previously. Not only did I feel free to be myself in virtual reality, but I felt occasionally free to be my worst self. Everybody knows that when you're in an environment where you are not really in the real world, you'll behave differently. Some claim you act in accordance with your most authentic self in online and virtual environments because you don't face any meaningful consequences for the less than kind words you say and the harmful actions you commit. Thus, you're free to be your true self, good or bad. I argue that you are behaving like the worst version of yourself. As a result of being in an environment where you're conditioned to feel that what you say and do is meaningless, whatever genuine empathy you had and whatever care you have felt for other people for is largely nullified. You might behave as the person you'd be if you lost your usual awareness of impact and consequence. It's not that you're behaving as you really are, you're behaving as if you cannot see the harm your actions cause, which in my opinion is not a reflection of your true self. I think being in a situation in which your empathy level is at its baseline and you have a fuller awareness of your impact is a better reflection of who you truly are. In Rec Room, that applied to me. I was usually not actively hostile. Exactly. Let's just say my words were more unrestrained and unfiltered. Instead of calling people slurs, saying fuck you, words that are intended to directly hurt the people who act as an obstacle in some way to you, I would say ah shit or fuck me. Certainly not kind words, but rarely outright toxic or mean. Still, especially in a kid's game, that was not acceptable behavior, even though, not to self-rationalize, but young children swear a lot more than adults, so it's not like I'm corrupting their innocence in any way or exposing them to harmful words they have never heard before. That's some good copium. Essentially, because I was in an environment where I wasn't fully cognizant of my impact on other people, I was free to be the person I wanted to be, in a bad way. I was loud, confrontational, easily agitated, and yes, occasionally hostile. I was challenging my mind's acceptance that I was weak, timid, and vulnerable, which were traits that sort of motivated some of my self-loathing. Because I had reduced awareness of the harm I was causing, I performed those acts with minimal guilt. This made me feel free to an extent, like I was somebody else, somebody bolder and stronger. That was until I took off the headset and realized not too long afterward that I was being a person I hated much more. To summarize why I became invested in Rec Room in the first place, it was not just a game. It was an alternate reality whose sense of realism was heightened by the medium of virtual reality. In Rec Room, I could be with my people, which provided me with belonging, community, and love that allowed me to challenge the harmful self-perception of myself as worthless, unlovable, and weak. In addition, I could become the person I repressed when I was younger, except this time this character possessed some of the characteristics I liked about my current, more mature self, and also some of the worst, which made me feel more liberated, emboldened, or which again therapeutically combated those awful, crushing feelings and insecurities that plagued me for so long. Lastly, I could have fun, satisfying my competitive spirit, and feel like I was accomplishing something meaningful in the rec room. After saying that aloud and half earnestly, it made me realize why I got bullied. Like, God, I was such a fucking dork. But because patterns exist, you probably predicted that I would say it challenged my self perception, which made me feel happier and freer. So, what went wrong? Well, if you're paying attention to even this video alone at all, you would probably notice a lot. But I'll go more into detail in part 2.